All right. How are you guys doing? Please be seated. I'm Ed, and this is Lisa, and welcome to Fellowship Church. If you're one of the ones at one of our many, many campuses, we welcome you down in Dallas, Fort Worth, Plano, Miami, here in beautiful Grapevine. It's great to have you here. Today, we are talking about sex. And we have embarked on this sex experiment over the last 7 days. We've challenged couples at Fellowship Church, married couples, to have sex for 7 days. And of course, we haven't commanded it, but we've suggested it, Lisa. So I thought today we would talk about that and talk about 7 things that should happen and have happened when we have sex over a week's time.
That's great, because there is such a depth to understanding how God created sex and has placed it at the center and a huge part of marriages. And so I believe that marriages will be strengthened, they will be deepened, the intimacy level on all fronts, whether it's physical, emotional, the relationship between husband and wife will just be incredible because of this experiment.
And it's not that we don't think about sex. We all think about sex, but I don't think that we think deeply enough about it, because whenever you connect God with sex or sex with God, people freak. And I think it's been really amazing, Lisa, to see the responses from people, how many have maybe done the pushback at first, but now they're warmly receiving this and welcoming this, and it's causing a lot of people to think. It's also causing a lot of believers to do it in marriage, because I don't think we're having enough sex in marriage.
A recent poll says, you gave statistics last week about the poll that said, 78% of fathers did not feel that they were sexually fulfilled, they were not having sex enough. And I saw a recent poll that said that couples who consider their marriages to be above average, put 81% of them, they have a very active sex life. So it definitely is a barometer reading, a temperature gauge on how the marriage is going. And I like to talk about the romance or the connectivity with communication. Those are the things that just, to me, say so much about how the marriage is going. But the reality of it is the depth of sex, the part that we just forget how deeply God thinks of it, what a huge part it plays in our marriage. And so now I'm coming to understand that is really the temperature gauge.
It is, because what happens inside the bedroom affects what happens outside the bedroom, and also what happens outside the bedroom affects what happens inside the bedroom. So during this 7 days of sex, a lot of us have had a lot of sex. For some, maybe it's not been that much.
Tell by those who are smiling. But on that note, too, Ed, we also know that there have been a lot of issues dealt with this week. And we know that there's been some pain.
Exactly.
Hopefully there's been some forgiveness. But if anything could come out of this, because there's not there's not an award for the 7-day challenge. Nobody's out here trying to get an award. But there is a reward of what God can do in your marriage. And if there has been some conflict and some difficult times, our prayer is that you've sought help. Whether it's going to a Christian counselor or talking to a confidant, someone who can give you great biblical understanding. Maybe you're going to revisit some of the teachings of this series just to have that understanding of what God wants sex to be like in your marriage.
And almost every married couple we've talked to in years and years and years of teaching about marriage and sex and speaking at different conferences, almost every couple has said, I wish we had more sex. And that's why we have these stanchions up here, because these stanchions represent, Lisa, some bedroom barriers that a lot of couples face. Like, for example, kids. Mm-hmm. And then this next one is the career thing. So many of us have dual incomes, and we're going here, going there, and this career thing is tough to balance. Then on top of that, the commitments.
And then my favorite is fatigue. Sometimes
Exhaustion.
All this stuff, you're just like, I'm so tired, I'm so tired.
And these are real barriers,
real
bedroom barriers. And I think the couples here have overcome a lot of these barriers because you have made good on this experiment. And I have to confess this, I hate to confess this. Yesterday, I had a very, very exhausting day. I was up at 4 a.m., meetings, and I spoke and did a lot of stuff. When I got home, the kids were acting crazy. We're trying to pack to leave for a trip. I said, you know what? I'm going to go back to our bedroom and just lie down and close my eyes.
Take a little quick nap.
Take a little quick nap because Lisa and I hadn't done it yet. So that's why I said a little nap. So I went back there, closed the door, and all of a sudden I was asleep. I'm talking about, I was dead to the world.
Okay, well, I have a confession too.
Okay.
Because for the first time ever, I went into the bedroom like, Ed, wake up! You can't go to sleep! You can't go to sleep! I would never have done that if we weren't in the middle of the challenge.
No. And here's what I said. I've never said this in my entire life. I said, honey, I'm too tired. Let's just double up tomorrow, you know? So I hate to confess that, guys.
But don't tell anything else.
I won't say anything else. But we should not be shy.
Let's talk about scripture or something else.
But you know what? We are talking about scripture because we should not be shy to talk about what God was not shy to write about. It's really interesting. If you read just the book of Song of Solomon, it's so vivid and so explicit. A lot of the translators of the Bible were scared of the Hebrew because it talks about marital love between a man and a woman. It talks about the sacredness and the beauty and the holiness of the marriage bed. So my challenge and my hope to all of you would be, hey, keep on doing what you've done this week. In other words, you made it through these stanchions, these barriers. Obviously, you negotiated around them, and look what happened. So that shows Lisa and I that we can do it more because I think it's
all about priorities.
Yeah, it's about priorities. And I think a great take home in this, because the Bible says in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, it says, stop depriving one another. In other words, start fulfilling one another's sexual desires. I believe the take home is we should try to double up the amount of intimacy that we have in marriage. And when I say intimacy, I'm not talking about holding hands in the park or a back rub. I'm talking about making love in marriage because God invented it, God made it, so we can make it. We're in
So
marriage.
what you're saying is outside of the 7-day sex challenge,
Yeah.
if someone is engaging in sex once a week,
Try
double
twice
up
a week.
twice a week,
Yeah.
and then from there on.
Because again, what happens here affects what happens there, and what happens there affects what happens here. So I want to go through real quick 7 things, and I touched on 4 of these last time. 7 things that happened, Lisa, in this experiment, and I think these will be cool things. So I'm going to sit down on the bed. You can stand if you want to.
I'll stand.
And talk about these things. Now, the first thing that happens when we make love in marriage is we fulfill God's purpose for our marriage. And that's a huge thing to remember, that we're fulfilling God's agenda that He has for a man and a woman.
The second thing that we do is intimacy reveals our true self. That's one thing that I've found throughout this week, that intimacy tells me, when I look at Ed, I see my best and my worst, and he sees his best and his worst. So it's revealed my true self. And
Yeah.
I kind of have to come to terms with that in the sexual relation.
And that's why we talk about marriage being a mirror, and we've written a book about this whole thing, because when you do look at your spouse, you see reflected back your best and your worst. That's why so many marriages don't have intimacy, and so many marriages end up in the deep weeds, because people don't like what they see reflected back. So they go from relationship, they sleep from bed to bed, and when it becomes too close or too intimate, they're out of there. And too many people too, Lisa, I think, can play hide and seek in the bedroom.
But I think this week it's like, okay, game's over.
Yeah.
Because what we've all had to do, those who are participating in this challenge, is to really take a close look at the issues in our own life and get those things right and out in the open so that we can move past the issues and get on to intimacy.
And when I say hide and seek in the bedroom, I'm not talking about something crazy. I'm talking about we hide from sex. We hide from making love to our spouse because when we make love, we have got to reveal everything. Nakedness assumes what? Intimacy. It assumes vulnerability. In marriage, we're economically naked, we're spiritually naked, we're physically naked. So if we stay away from the bedroom, if we use all of these excuses, and these are real excuses, then we'll never, ever, ever have the intimacy being into me, seeing into me like the spouse should.
The third thing that we find through the 7-day sex challenge is that it thwarts sexual temptation. And I truly believe this is such a huge thing for us to understand, is that if we can have great, fulfilling sex in marriage, then we're helping put like an alarm system around our family, an alarm system around our relationships, so that these outside forces, pornography, lust, an extramarital affair, can be thwarted. It can and help diffuse that.
And I don't think neither the husband nor the wife realizes the role that they play in the lust quotient, because a desire is from God, and the way we steward our desires determines our destiny, and our destiny determines our desires. So all desires are God-driven. When we do them and do it God's way, we're gonna go to a whole nother level. If we don't, we're gonna meet a whole new devil when we are led around and when we bite the lure of lust, because the devil does not practice catch and release. No, he doesn't.
The fourth one is so great, because all of us talk about how can we leave a legacy? How can we make a difference for the next generation? And I am confident that, believe it or not, great sex in marriage is a huge part of building a legacy in our children. I think that, in fact, I know that Ed and I and our relationship, because so goes the intimacy sexually, so goes evidence of our forgiveness for one another, so goes our communication skills, so goes all those different things. And our children see that modeled out. Now, they don't see the sacredness of our bedroom, but they know that we have that intimacy because it's reflected in all these different areas. And so when they go to get married, when they go to select a spouse, they're going to be thinking so deeply about that relationship and what it means and what it stands for. And then also have a benchmark by which the romance, the creativity, the love, and the spiritual leadership that they should be looking for.
Mm-hmm. Now, the fifth thing is something that you don't really think about so often when you're having sex. The fifth thing is it highlights, I'm talking about sex for 7 days, it highlights the real F word. Forgiveness. Ephesians 4:32, it got quiet. Ephesians 4:32, it says, be kind one to another, tenderhearted, forgiving one another, even as God for Christ's sake has forgiven you. So be kind one to another, tenderhearted, forgiving one another, even as God for Christ's sake has forgiven you. Because, Lisa, when you're involved regularly with your spouse sexually, when you're making love intentionally and creatively and lovingly, guess what? You're going to have to deal with the real F word, forgiveness. You've got to deal with those issues.
Well, and in that passage of Scripture, right before it, it talks about how we have to overcome bitterness and anger and harboring ill feelings. And I will admit, bitterness can be my friend. It becomes that attachment to me that I like to hold on to because.
You're kidding.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of women have that. Guys can, we can do something to a guy. I mean, I can do something to Ed and be mean, and then I ask for forgiveness. He's forgiven me. It's just something that I struggle with, so I'm assuming that other people do as well. And that is one of the huge barriers that gets in the way of intimacy.
And sometimes, Lisa, you're not going to have every little thing settled before
detail, no.
you go to bed. I mean,
But,
that's.
but in our
yeah.
commitment to one another,
Yes.
that when we said I do to one another, with that commitment, it wasn't a conditional commitment that, well, not tonight because we haven't settled every issue. That wasn't the type of commitment that we made.
We'd never make love if that were the case.
That's probably true, but
Yeah.
I hope not.
No, I
Well,
mean, there's always going to be something.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
always
yeah. Oh,
something.
yeah, yeah.
That's
Yeah,
what I
I
meant.
gotcha. I mean, you always have some things you're dealing with.
Right.
Everything is not perfect. It will not ever be perfect. But because of forgiveness and because we're willing to say, you know what, we're committed, we will work this through. We'll work it out. And
But
then
I think
intimacy
too many
follows.
couples.
I see what you're saying.
Too many couples go, everything's got to be perfect for us to make love. You know, it's got to be a full moon, and the birds have to be chirping, and I don't know, certain song. Our song has got to be on, and the candles have to be from a certain company, and blah blah blah. So that's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, forgiveness is huge.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's huge. So I think, and I hope, and I pray that we've gotten a lot of that out there. And I want to challenge you again: if you keep facing those same issues, the same forgiveness issues, that's when I would challenge you to walk through the door of a Christian counselor and talk about it, because every marriage deals with the same stuff, but the successful marriages negotiate around those stanchions and they deal with it. Now, the sixth thing that has happened and will happen is it demands, I'm talking about when you make love regularly, it demands unselfishness. Marriage is all about unselfishness. It's about the other person. And whenever we have problems in our marriage, and believe me, we do, guess what? It's my bad. It is my bad. I am not seeking God. I am not listening to Him. And I'm kicking Him out of the Oval Office of my life, and I'm running the show. And that is where the wheels begin to fall off. It's like this book that was written several years ago. This author had a phenomenal title, Lord, Change Me. And I think so often I want to say, yeah, but Lisa's not doing this, and she's doing this, and blah, 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 blah. And that's fine and dandy, but the bottom line is, I got to change before God what I can change as I defer and let Him do the deal.
It's easy to look at the faults and everything that's wrong with someone else and not pay attention to yourself. But what I have to do is to put Ed's needs above my own. But there's this point system out there that is just, it tries to take over my mind, and I'm thinking, well, but he did not consider me at this place or here in this area.
And the point system is real.
And it's real. And so
Yes.
then I'm thinking, but if he only gave 40%, then I'll only give 40%. And that's not what Christ did for us.
Exactly.
He gave 100% of himself. And remember, the marriage is a reflection of Christ in the church. He gave himself for the church. And we should be that type of, Ed should be that with me, sacrificial love. And so it's 100%. It's not based on how he lives or how, and he doesn't base his action on my unselfishness. So it's all about fulfilling the needs and serving the needs of the other.
But what the scriptures say is that God's grace is sufficient for today. I love that. It's not like, of course it's sufficient forever and ever, but I mean, I think we so freak out about, okay, what about next month and next year? It's for
We get
today.
anxious
And
about
the thing about
things
the
out
point
there in the
system
future.
is the scoreboard is pretty much erased every day and the points, But even sometimes when the points don't look that good, we still challenge couples, Lisa, to make love. Because even, and this is the question I wanted to ask you, and this is one of the questions that a lot of people now have asked us about this sex experiment. What happens when one is not in the mood and the other is in the mood? What do you do? And then the singles will ask this one. Well, shouldn't we have sex prior to marriage because it shows, and it reveals to us that we're sexually compatible? How do you answer those questions?
Well, I'll go with the first one, the one that you're asking about, in the mood, not in the mood. Well, we've always said, you know what? If you say no with an appointment. Not today, maybe later tonight. Not tonight, how about tomorrow night? But that no should be given when there is a legitimate
I even did that last night. I said, not
Ed had
tonight,
gotten
I'm
up
tired, tomorrow.
Ed had gotten up very, very early that day, and he had a full schedule. And again, things were going crazy. He just laid down, blah, blah, blah. So it was not tonight, but with an appointment. So that's the exception, though, not necessarily the rule. I believe that we, especially women, because we just don't feel it all the time. We don't have those feelings of love and romance. But again, we can act our way into a feeling rather than feeling our way into an action. And when you think like that, then you're willing to roll with it, kind of.
Yeah.
Would you say that?
I would say.
Roll with it.
In 1 Corinthians chapter 7:5, the passage that we're referring to, Lisa, it has revolutionized so many marriages over the years, and it's been incredible when people understand, both the man and the woman, the husband and the wife, when you're unselfish, when you're loving one another like the Lord wants us to love, it's not about me, it's not about exhaustion, it's not about being overly committed, it's not about the career or the kids, it's about my spouse. That's the most important relationship. Then you're going to have a very fulfilling and engaging sex life, which transcends every single area in our marriage. So how I would answer my question, the other question I ask you, okay, I'm single, I need to have sex, to see if we're compatible, and feel free to weigh in on this. No one is perfectly sexually compatible. If you think that, what in the world are you smoking? No one is. So,
and Ed, think about the divorce rate of those who cohabitate. They cohabitate, they live together, and you'd think, well, then that must be the answer because they figured out they're sexually compatible, and so that works. But then the divorce rate is the same, if not higher, for those who live together before marriage. So that doesn't work.
Yeah, you're never going to be perfectly sexual
There's
compatible.
A faith portion. Just as it's by faith we are saved, there's a faith in your marriage. And that's an issue that I think we're just not wanting to let God take care of.
Yeah, and here's the deal,
we just
too.
want to be in control of
that.
That is
a lie. I mean, the parts fit. So if you're loving one another selflessly and sacrificially, that's going to take care of itself.
Absolutely.
I mean,
absolutely. The seventh thing is that we see through the 7-day sex challenge is that it cultivates creativity. And I would say for Ed and I, this to me has been huge because you think about 7 days of sex. I mean, that can be kind of monotonous. I mean, let's face it, again, I'm telling you, it's not about completing a task. It's about a deeper meaning. It's about loving each other in a more significant way, in a more creative way. And so it's helped us think creatively about romance and about how to, I guess you could say, spice up our love life.
Spice up our love life, because romance and creativity go hand in hand, and it's easy. I think the guys, we go, I want more sex, and I think there's probably a legitimate point there. But I also think when we begin to have sex regularly, to guys, it's almost like, okay, because we don't want to think outside the box and be creative and be romantic.
So you don't want to think outside the bed.
Yeah, that's right. We don't think outside the bed. Whereas women, I believe, are more in touch with their creativity and more in touch with romance. But, women can work on that too. A lot of women come to bed in those not tonight, honey nightgowns.
Yeah.
Guys, I kind of drop those hints early in the day, like there's going to be no action tonight. Like, I'm just exhausted. That happens. And then, guys, we drop those hints too, like we talk about football games being on, and so it's interesting to me. The whole dynamic is interesting, but creativity is something too that snaps the head of people who are not followers of Christ, because they sometimes think, wait a minute, you can be creative in the marriage bed.
Yeah, I mean, creativity is just something that's a product of our thought. We have to just start thinking about it.
And we're not talking about anything pornographic
No,
or,
no, no,
or
no,
entering
no. Obviously
into
not
that
that.
world. Not that, but
take your cues from Song of Solomon.
yeah.
The book of Song of Solomon.
I mean, you're
in the
talking
Old
about
Testament.
some friends of yours, some of the things that they've done in this experiment that have been pretty cool.
Yes, I had a friend, and she took a picture of her nightgown, her negligee, on the bed. Obviously, she wasn't in it. She took a picture of it. It was just laying across the bed, and she texted it to her husband. I think that was pretty cool. And then she texted a picture of the bath with rose petals and candles lit on it. I mean, that's just something. I'm like, I didn't think of that.
Good.
I don't know how to text real well, so it wouldn't have worked very good. I could have sent it to anybody, so that would have been bad.
Whoa!
Not good, but anyway, just I know when our kids were younger, we would not eat dinner with them, have them eat, put them to bed, and then have a picnic in our room with candlelight. I mean, that was the romance, the creativity part.
And if you have teenagers, and when it comes to kids, all you got to do is just say, hey, your mom and I are going to get funky tonight. They won't come near your bedroom. They won't even come. They won't even approach it.
Can I spend the night at your
They'll
house
stay
tonight?
outside in the driveway. And people sometimes wonder, how do I get my 20-something to move out of the house? That's how you do it.
That's good. Those are 7 great things.
They are. And what I want the take home to be, Lisa, and I know you do as well, is for all of us to see the significance of sex, because we have such a time in our culture of devaluing it. And, you know, of course, as you hear me say all the time, I love fishing, and one of my favorite pastimes is to tie flies. And when you tie flies, you have to use different materials, different types of feathers and thread and things like that to make.
It makes a huge mess.
It does.
Big mess.
All around
you
the
make
house.
some cool flies.
So when you tie the fly, though, you have to have one ingredient that solidifies the recipe, the fly recipe. You know what it is? Super glue. You put super glue at the right spots on that fly, or epoxy, whatever you want to use. It just brings the fly together. It makes the fly durable and tough, and it makes the fly work. Sex in marriage is the super glue. It's the epoxy that holds the entire recipe together. For far too long, the church has devalued it. We've not talked about it. We've been shy about it. We've acted like sex is a secret when it's just the opposite. So I would tell you, if you've said, I do it. Do it in marriage. Do it intentionally, do it regularly, do it enthusiastically. God will bless your marriage, and He will allow you to leave a legacy like you've never dreamed possible. We're the sexperts. Let's have sex, and let's do it God's way as we continue to be His people.